Joining us now is writer and broadcaster Esther Krakue. Esther, we all agree the Sussexes need to earn a living, but there have been plenty of mutterings. We understand that Netflix has started to tease about what's on the cards. What on earth do we know so far?
So we know that the Netflix chief content officer has confirmed that their $100 million Netflix deal with the Sussexes are going to continue into 2024, which is good news for them because unlike Spotify, they didn't just cancel the deal altogether. Apparently, the Sussexes have many projects in the works that Meghan herself said they're very excited for, and they want to make projects that make people feel. So clearly, they have some stuff in the works. Now, what worries me or worries most people is when the Spotify deal fell through because the Archetypes podcast didn't do that well. That was the Sussexes effectively promoting themselves as their own brand and getting people to basically fall in love with themselves as people. When you move into the production side of things, when you're producing content, you actually have to have some experience. You have to have a lot of knowledge in the industry. Now, we know that they have hired members of staff, but they seem to be hemorrhaging members of staff at the same rate. I mean, they've had 17 people leave the organization since it started a few years ago. And, you know, one of the things that you have to question is these people don't really have that much experience in anything. Meghan was an actress. She wasn't exactly, you know, Martin Scorsese, so we don't really know what kind of expertise she's bringing in on that front. And Harry really hasn't done a hard day of work really, other than you know, being in the army, and you can even argue then he was still in quite a protected position. So the question is, if Netflix are going to continue you know, funding this couple and giving them this $100 million deal, are they actually going to get their money's worth? Now, we have heard murmurings that there's going to be a Harry and Meghan series part 2. We obviously know the first series did quite well. I think it was the most watched series on Netflix. So they're going to do, they're planning a second series. But again, there's so many questions that come with that. First of all, the sheen has worn off the couple. They don't seem to generate as much interest. The intrigue has worn off. Is it going to be, you know, a kind of basically a saga of them whinging about the royal family again? Again, you can't make something like that work a second time. The shine has worn off. So there are many questions as to how that is going to work. But Netflix has confirmed that at least for 2024, their $100 million deal is safe, and the couple will still get a chance to produce content with them. Whether it's content that will resonate with the public, we're not sure.
Yeah, I think that's a very fair observation. And now, look, we know the royals have traditionally kept out of politics and the courts. Harry's the first royal to give evidence in 130 years. But the Sussexes have broken that tradition again and commented on a recent US Senate inquiry into the regulation of social media sites. Now, in a statement, they said, amongst other things, we applaud the bravery and determination of the thousands of parents around the country whose advocacy resulted in this hearing. This is an issue that transcends division and party lines, as we saw today at the Senate hearing. It's the time to make the necessary change at the source to keep our children safe. Now, they also released this video alongside the statement.
When the car was first invented, there wasn't a seatbelt. And what happened? People started to get hurt. People started to die. So you started to change the car.
We need to get out of this idea that, you know, young kids, there's something wrong with them. It's the world that we're allowing to be created around them.
Esther, it might be a particular issue that transcends party lines, but it's still quite unusual, isn't it?
It is quite unusual where royals are concerned, but I think most people are considering Harry and Meghan less and less royals and more kind of just famous couple doing their own thing. They released that statement on behalf of the Archewell Foundation because they've obviously done a lot of work with safeguarding children online. But it's not surprising. I mean, this couple has routinely broken royal protocol. I don't know if you remember before the last US general election, they released a video to vote for love and to choose hope. So they've never really shied away from wading into politics. With this particular statement that they submitted to the Senate hearing, I understand why they did it. I understand why the members of the Senate committee wanted them to do it, because obviously it's getting publicity for this hearing. Mark Zuckerberg testified at the hearing as well. So it makes sense and it's very on brand. But if you're talking about sort of what's traditionally expected from royal members of the royal family, family. This is not it. But they've made it very clear that they're not interested in following any sort of protocol or being active members of the royal family, for that matter.
Speaking about the active members of the royal family, the royal website is often updated. Sometimes those updates are benign, sometimes they raise eyebrows. What's the latest, and is it instructive?
So the latest has kind of corresponded with where we are at in terms of the position of the Sussexes. So they've been moved basically to the bottom of the landing page, which features working members of the royal family. There was a stipulation underneath sort of Prince Harry's bit that said that, you know, him and Meghan are going to continue to work with the king to fulfill their various patronages and to uphold the interests of the king and the royal family. That has also been tweeted. So basically, they're basically a footnote on the royal family website, which corresponds with the reality of the situation. They clearly have no interest in upholding any kind of support for what the king represents. They are more interested in sort of their deal with Netflix and producing content and going to Jamaica to sit at film premieres and all of that. And, you know, the royal family website should reflect their actual current status. It's the same thing with Prince Andrew. This man has basically no place in public life, and the website has reflected that. I'm sure this is not something that will affect the Sussexes, but it is interesting to kind of notice the parallels. So, you know, the royal family runs a tight ship, particularly with regard to its PR and how it communicates with the public. It has an entire institution, and it's an entire ecosystem there. And the Sussexes, I think, tried to replicate that when they left the royal family. They tried to replicate that sort of structure, especially because that's all Harry knew, but it's proven more difficult than before. So now they're just, you know, they've hired basically Hollywood PR agents and you know, have used the same sort of press releases that you would expect of a typical Hollywood celebrity, as opposed to the more intricate and carefully thought out detail that goes into the kinds of communications the royal family has with the media. I mean, they're not even on social media, for instance, so that, you know, no one knew they were going to turn up in Jamaica. They turned up and they just let things happen how they happen, and there's that kind of lack of finesse, and that really shines through, and it makes it easier for them to have blunders. And I think this just, you know, this update on the royal family website just shows, you know, the kind of well-oiled machine that's going on in the firm, as opposed to the Sussexes that are kind of you know, being quite I suppose scatterbrained with their approach to media and public communications.
But I mean, after all, Harry and Meghan are out on their own, and they do have quite the lifestyle. And it's interesting that the firm, it still seems to be keeping tabs. We understand there is some concern from within the palace about their spending. Is there anything in this?
Well, yes, but mainly because what happens when they run out of money. I don't think the royal family or the palace are concerned with how Harry and Meghan spend their money, because it's their money. They can do what they want. We know that Princess Diana left Harry a sizable inheritance, I think to the tune of around £36 million. So this man is in no way poor. And obviously the Netflix deal helps. He's able to fund these expensive court cases that I don't think will pay him as much as he's paying into it, should I say. And we know that Meghan was a fairly successful actress in her own right. But you have to factor in what exactly they're spending their money on. So apparently their mansion in Montecito, they took out a mortgage of about $9 million. Their security alone a year is probably worth at least a few $1 million. And so when you look at it from that perspective, their living expenses are adding up. And the palace estimates that they're spending, you know, $20 million a year just to exist. So what happens when, you know, the deals run dry? I mean, Netflix, Spotify is out the door. Netflix is $100 million. I'm assuming they'll spend part of that money on actual production. So what are they going how are they going to sustain themselves? And I think the concern for the palace is that when the money starts to dry up, they're going to, you know, go back to their shenanigans and their antics and offer anyone an interview that's willing to listen and try and exploit their proximity to the royal family to make ends meet. We don't really know what's going to happen with that, but I suspect having round-the-clock armed security in the US is not cheap, particularly in a place like California, which is expensive to live in. So that's mainly the concern of the palace. What happens when this couple runs out of money? Or even worse, what happens if they get divorced? Where will Harry go? How will he sustain himself? Divorce is in I believe it's a community property state, California. That's certainly not going to be cheap. And he has children who will likely go with their mother spend more time with their mother than their father. So these are all kinds of things that the royal family have to factor in. It's not to say that they're concerned with them taking money from the palace. It's just there will come a point where this lifestyle will be unsustainable because the economic productivity of this couple is not very high.
Now on to the Queen and Camilla. Look, she's not always been a favourite, but she's played the long game and she has managed to come out as Queen. There's a great piece in Tatler this week about Camilla's evolution from the most hated woman in England to the nation's grandmother. Tell us about it.
Yeah, so it's been very interesting observing Queen Camilla's rise, should I say. I mean, this was probably one of the most hated women in Britain, particularly with the whole brouhaha between Charles and Diana. And then when they got married in 2005, even the Queen, getting the Queen's permission was seen as quite a big deal. But actually with Kate out of action for basically until Easter and the King recovering from prostate surgery, we're really seeing Queen Camilla shine. She's been at the hospital frequently. We've seen her photographs. She's been holding down the fort. She's going to be taking on some of the engagements that King Charles has to take on, as well as Princess Catherine. And she's now really being seen as the glue that's holding the royal family together. I mean, King Charles has been very open about the fact that she's been his support. She's been someone who's really steadied him and really helped him focus. She's always said that King Charles needs to slow down and he's a bit of a workaholic, and you can see that there's a real benefit not just to the monarch but to the country, to have them having this mutual support of each other. And the Queen has had to deal with a lot. I mean, she's had to have a whole kind of PR rebranding scheme just to rehabilitate her public image after King Charles's acrimonious divorce with Princess Diana. But you can see that she's really come out on top. And at the end of the day, she seems more human to most people than sort of what the tabloids painted her as, certainly in the 1990s and the early 2000s. And I think as people of age, as the country's grown with Queen Camilla, they've also grown to understand her, and they've understood her circumstances and how, life is not perfect. No one is perfect. And sometimes people make mistakes, but they can come back from them.